In our time together today, we will explore spiritual direction and taxes. As we go along, we will consider the questions: what belongs to the state? What belongs to God? Perhaps most telling, what belongs to me? In Matthew 22, Jesus is in Jerusalem with his followers. His first priority on entering the city was to speak at the temple, and he challenged the chief priests and elders with difficult and dark parables. We are told that they knew he was judging them. Our story begins. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Jesus said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's." Jesus' enemies asked him a question about Jewish law and Roman occupation. Jesus reframed the question and made it about political and spiritual discernment. Jesus didn't give them the answer. He did force them to contemplate their money. This would have been very uncomfortable. On one side of the coin, there would have been a seated female figure. On the other, a profile of one of the Caesar's heads. However they would have looked at it, there was a human figure represented, which was strictly forbidden by Jewish law. To really look at the coin broke the rules of their faith. The coin would also likely have had the logo Pontiff Maxim on one side, which literally meant supreme bridge builder, meaning the high priest who bridged the gap between earth and heaven. The Jewish people believed in only one God who was met in their temple through their priesthood, not through the Roman emperor. To really look at the coin was to see a direct challenge to Yahweh. The coin was also written in a foreign language, representing a ruling people who lived far away and took most of the produce of the land, while offering little more than good roads and a lot of big soldiers. To really look at the coin was to face the shame of foreign domination. Knowing all of this, Jesus still required this action of his accusers. He required them to acknowledge the coin and to give the emperor what was the emperor's. He did not give them permission to revolt militarily, to withhold taxes, or to run away from their political situation. We can do the same. We can flip heads and see who looks up at us. For me in Canada, that brings me face to face with the Queen of England. For you, it may be George Washington or the logo of the European Union. When you look at your coin, notice your reaction. Surprise? Love? Disappointment? Fear? How does your national identity move you? How strong is that reaction compared to your thoughts of God or family? I do hope your reaction is not as strongly negative as that of Jesus' contemporaries, but do pay attention to how much power your national identity holds for you. When we consider the face or image we hold in our hand, let us consider our place in that sphere. It is easy to let politics fade into the background as our daily lives take over our awareness. I am a mother of young children. I understand this. It is also easy to let others digest political issues and feed us a steady diet of unrest or black and white answers. Everything is so-and-so's fault. Sometimes we escape into the spiritual realm. We think that we can draw a curtain around ourselves and focus only on our inner life. It is difficult to keep our eyes open and fix our gaze on the world as it is. Jesus would stand beside us and gently bid us to look and listen a little longer. After all, governments are ultimately made up of people, lots of people. No matter how insignificant or uninformed we may feel, we are part of this, and we are responsible for it. Jesus did not raise up military arms to improve his people's condition, but he did spend himself to relieve their suffering from disease, hunger, and hopelessness. He spoke out. He acted. He shows us that God's way is personal compassion. A story that touches me, that is like that, is Craig Kielburger's story, maybe because he discovered his passion for justice in such a natural way. At the breakfast table, reading the paper, he was just a kid. He read one story about one boy who was threatened because of his activism, and Craig's sense of justice and rightness were challenged until he personally mobilized his family and friends to advocate directly for these children. Now he mobilizes thousands through his Free the Children campaign. Doesn't that feel right? It's not a blinding supernatural experience, but one in which hearts burn nonetheless. This could happen to me, to you. All that it takes is to really look. In this passage, Jesus offers us a spiritual exercise that is just as real as meditating on Scripture or spending time in prayer. When we look at our money, we can discern how real it is. Is it as real as air or water, even time? I think of driving home after a reunion one summer, after a week of no computer and no television. The warmth and connection of that week carried our car home across the border into Canada. I felt like an alien from another planet when I saw the giant billboards that line the border. I saw each one as if for the first time and realized the power that these images carry. I could feel the struggle in my soul as the advertisements fought for me to believe their view of an insufficient world and an insufficient me over the reality of community and wholeness that we lived that week. Jesus told the Pharisees and Herodians to give to the emperor what was the emperor's. Jesus tells us, too, to give to the state what is the state's. We are not to give blindly and hope for the best, or to give more than our money, for our hearts belong to God. But now, I get ahead of myself. Jesus said, give to God what is God's. In this passage, Jesus takes the spiritual and the material elements of life, and he holds them together. This is like our mission initiatives, which act in concert, so there becomes no division between stewardship and evangelism and discipleship formation. Jesus told them, and tells us, that we cannot afford to have a political mind and a spiritual mind. If we are segmented beings, looking at the world differently on Sunday than on Monday, then how can we possibly figure out what belongs to the emperor and what belongs to God? We are at war with ourselves. If we would be disciples of Jesus Christ, then we must see the world as Jesus sees, with worldly experience and spiritual insight born of spiritual devotion. If we live out of compassion, then we care about the well-being of those around us. We develop our congregations and our discipleship, not for ourselves, but to provide a spiritual home for those seeking hope. Our money, our time, these become our means of hospitality. When we look at our money, we can measure our hearts. How much do they long for money? When we look at our money, we can test our impulses. Do we hold on like the rich young ruler, or do we offer like the widow? How much money must we have before we are free to be generous? How generous do we want to be? This test of generosity extends into our relationships. Sometimes we think that the gospel is good enough for us, but maybe our friends and our colleagues are doing okay without it. I only know it is very doubtful I would be here with you today if one of my mom's schoolmates in rural Maine had not invited her to church. It was a simple gesture, but one that I am deeply grateful for. I believe that the ideal expressed throughout the Bible is sacramental living. We are told again and again that we are to die to our worldly selves, love the Lord with our hearts, might, mind, and strength, do the smallest job as if it were for God, and to care for the stranger. The Bible tells us in so many ways that God is invested in humanity and all creation. God's priorities sound good to me. We may have well-defined personal boundaries around what is holy and sacred and what is not, but I imagine that God does not find these boundaries amusing. If we take Jesus seriously about giving to God what is God's, we may be led into new places. I think of my home congregation 10 years ago. We discerned that music was one of our greatest strengths, and we wanted to reach out to the musical community around us through our worship space. So we committed ourselves to raise money for a grand piano. This was a big task as we didn't want to take funds away from our congregation or World Church or their campground, so we reached out for a greater level of giving from everyone. of sacrificial giving, and there was a heartening response. The story that touches me most is that of Verlin. She was a senior on a fixed income, and she was not able to make an extra contribution. What she could do was to forego getting her hair set each week for a time, and offer that money for the piano. Instead of smooth curls, she was willing for her hair to look plain, so that she could respond to this vision for our congregational life together. We now have many people who enter our doors for musical concerts and rehearsals, and we enjoy the piano each week in our worship. I think of Verlin often when I hear it, and her passion for participating in God's vision. She didn't set limits on her ability to give. That put her right in the middle of life. It made even her physical appearance holy. Why am I concerned about this scripture passage with its issues of money and politics and spiritual direction? Perhaps it's because I feel the spiritual fatigue around me. It seems like a weariness of doing good works. I feel the fear for the future, from the low thrum of nuclear disaster to the high pitch of environmental decay. It's difficult to think 2 generations into the future, not to mention 7, when any day we could be washed away by waves or go up in smoke. The future looked bleak to the Pharisees and Herodians too, and it would have looked even bleaker if they had foreseen the destruction of their temple in a few short years. Jesus' message to them was of faithfulness, God's enduring faithfulness, and the necessity of their faithfulness. The care of their souls demanded focus on God, not on fear-mongering. How do we give to God what is God's? We are encouraged not to put limits on our giving, and to consider our time and abilities as tithing along with our money. This brings us back to a sacramental view of life, the view that God is in everything and calls back to us for our holy lives. Let's go deeper. When I first saw my daughter, I didn't see my hair or John's eyes. I only saw God. I was struck with awe, wonder. It was easy then to see my job as caretaker for God's creation. Somewhere along the way, I started to take more responsibility and to identify more and more with her. Suddenly, she was mine, and her behavior reflected on me, not her, and certainly not God. Unfortunately, this present moment of reflection doesn't fully return me to that initial state of grace when I could live comfortably with the holy. But it does remind me that just as my life is a gift, so too are the lives of my children. So is yours. Give to God what is God's. So, what is mine? Jesus does not mention this option, and his answer seems to express the totality, that everything belongs to the state or God. This is not our natural way of being, as I well know as a mother. We are more inclined to act like toddlers than enlightened beings. I know this because I identify with my daughter's pain as they struggle each day to learn to share and to wait. These days, the most common words heard around my home, other than me saying no, are more and mine. My older daughter slips so easily back into this mode of expression as my younger daughter discovers her desires and claims as an individual. You and I have more sophisticated ways of saying more and mine, but the message is the same. We feel entitled and deserving of material fulfillment. Right now, please. Does Jesus lecture us or give us the look? No. Jesus stands and waits for the moment when our guard is down and our compassion is high. Jesus waits to startle us with a moment of clarity and purpose. Will we listen to our own fears and desires, or will we trust in God and in a world of abundance? Like the Jewish people, I don't think Jesus gives us permission to not pay taxes or to revolt against our governments. What Jesus does require is for us to be aware, compassionate, and active citizens, for us to be a people who work for good and carry a potent spiritual ethic and voice into our daily walks, a people who live what salvation looks like. We have come a long way in this exploration that began with a man holding up a silver penny and speaking one simple sentence. Jesus might look at us and smile and say, "Go even deeper." Let's go together.